Hey, the Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit is made possible by Samaritas, which is the state's largest private foster care and adoption agency. But they do a heck of a lot more than that. They've been serving homeless families, persons with disabilities, abused and trafficked women. They're also one of the largest resettlement agencies in the state. They provide market rate and affordable housing for seniors and HUD housing for families. And they also have skilled nursing, memory care, and rehab communities in Grand Rapids, Cadillac, and Saginaw. Samaritas, thanks for their support. Great organization, doing great stuff all around the state. Hey everybody, happy Friday. Welcome to the week that was on Deadline Detroit. I'm Craig Fahle, and as usual, here with me, Nancy Derringer and Alan Lengel from Deadline Detroit. Thank you both for being here.
Hello.
Like I said, hope you had a good 4th of July.
It was great.
The gunshots were going off on the east side. Nancy, you and I both live over there. That 9mm fire is unmistakable. Pop, pop.
It doesn't sound like a firecracker. And if you can't tell, that's one of the skills that I've picked up since I moved to Southeast Michigan, is telling gunshots from firecrackers.
Wow.
And car backfires,
That's a skill.
of course. Although the other day I actually
might be able to
heard a car backfire.
harness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, anyway, it went on well into the night.
Oh, yeah.
Last night. So that was interesting.
I was tired enough that I was able to sleep.
But, most people celebrate the 4th of July in their own way, right? They shoot off fireworks, they have barbecues, they do whatever.
One of the great things about the 4th of July
is that it's, everybody's got their own sort of interpretation as to what it's about, and that's fine. We don't normally have sort of, jingoistic military, big things that happen. I mean, obviously, there's the salute to the 4th with the patriotic music and all that sort of stuff. That's great. President Trump,
I tried renting a tank yesterday, but I was unsuccessful because they were all booked.
They were not rolling down the streets. But I mean,
could not get a tank yesterday. I don't know what was going on.
So President Trump, of course, has this event, and there was a lot of hand-wringing before this happened.
Right.
Was he going to turn this into a typical Trump campaign rally? Was he basically going to rail against press freedoms at a time when we're celebrating our rights? Right. He didn't do a lot of that. He read a speech off a teleprompter that was very much...
Badly.
We'll get to that in a second.
Who used to rip on Obama all the time
for reading off a teleprompter. But
in
an event like this, you need to stick to the script. This is not,
especially given what his off script sounds like.
Well,
so
absolutely. But he didn't. This was again a salute to the military, and he had the flyovers and the tanks that were parked there and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, there was a lot of people really worried as to what this was going to be. Was this going to be Trump at his worst? Was this going to be, Trump trying to unify the country? Overall impression of the event. I mean, I watched the speech yesterday, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the fun stuff that took place in there. But overall, I mean, I don't think he got the desired effect he was looking for.
Well, it rained. It rained heavily.
Yes,
he had to speak from behind that bulletproof enclosure that made him look like he was in a walk-in shower, and it, with the water with the water. I mean, the raindrops.
Anytime we hear shower, then we think of the dossier.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, so
we want to avoid that.
So he looked like he was in a shower. And I don't know where the prompter screens were as in relation to the thing, if they were inside or outside. But he's a terrible reader, and I think I heard that speech described as. An angry grandpa reads his middle school grandson's book report.
Well, given some of the things that were said in there, and granted, I am going to give him the benefit of the doubt on the fact that I think he just screwed up the reading of the teleprompter. But it's funny. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't care if you like the guy. It's still funny because the memes that have been created and the Twitter feed this morning has been exceptional. But I'm just going to read this little bit from this because I thought this was great.
Get to what the mistake was.
Well, I'm just going to read it, and people, then we can see if we can find the mistake here because there are a few.
All right.
In June of 1775, the Continental Congress created a unified army out of the Revolutionary forces encamped around Boston and New York and named after the great George Washington, Commander-in-Chief.
All right.
So there's one little flag to put in there right there. The Continental Army suffered a bitter winter of Valley Forge. Another little flag. Found glory across the waters of the Delaware and seized victory from Cornwallis of Yorktown. Another little flag there. Our army manned the blank. We couldn't really see what he was trying to say. It rammed the ramparts. It took over the airports. It did everything it had to do, and at Fort McHenry, under the rocket's red glare, it had nothing but victory. And when dawn came, their star-spangled banner waved defiant.
Well, first of all, he
airports.
said Fort McHenry, which made me think of Joe Pesci in Goodfellas, where Henry, he keeps calling him Henry. So yeah, Fort McHenry.
Okay, the first flag, they didn't name the army after George Washington.
No.
I mean, it
Right,
wasn't
and he
there.
called him Commander in Chief, which implies the presidency, and he wouldn't become president for quite some time after
Well,
that.
okay. And
Since we weren't a country yet.
So he starts out with June of 1775.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
But then he gets into the War of 1812 here. It's all sort
Yeah.
of blended
It is. It's
together.
all mushed
it's
together,
sort of
right.
like, it reminds me a lot of my 8th grade history book about this, because you basically just gloss over that entire period between the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812.
Right.
And all you knew at that point is that they burned down the White House.
Right.
Because the
Sure.
War of 1812 is criminally under talked about.
It is.
But then he gets to this part. He said, the Continental Army suffered a bitter winter of Valley Forge.
Yeah.
Well, at Valley Forge. I won't give him crap for that. Found glory across the waters of the Delaware and seized victory from Cornwallis of Yorktown.
Cornwallis of Yorktown.
He was not of Yorktown.
He was-
defeated at Yorktown, had to surrender at Yorktown, which is an
Yes.
actual place, not too far from the White House, as a matter of fact. Our army manned the whatever, but then it rammed the ramparts.
Rammed the ramparts.
Not sure what that means.
Yeah.
But then it took over the airports. And this is where the world gets funny. Because it took over the airports, because last I checked.
Were they talking about Reagan? Reagan National?
He's
It
sundowning.
would have just been Washington National at that point,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because they hadn't named it. Well, but it wasn't named Washington D.C. In fact, Washington D.C. didn't exist. Well, it did technically. No,
Okay.
Was it?
War of 1812. Yeah, it was Washington D.C. at that point.
District of Columbia.
District of
Right,
Columbia.
Sure.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this is great. It took over the airports.
Took over the airports.
The Wright brothers had not invented the plane yet. They might be surprised to
It was
know
a
that
futuristic.
it's ancient
kind of-
aliens
Yeah.
airports, that were there
They
because
were
they created.
anticipating
It
the
was
airports.
the land
They
that
had-
eventually would become Dulles Airport. So yeah, right. They
Maybe.
rammed the ramparts.
But
So
at the same time, what this has spawned has been absolutely hilarious. I mean, I don't know if you remember,
this is why I'm on Twitter. for
well,
this kind of
exactly,
stuff.
exactly. And the Twitter hashtag, I believe, is Revolutionary War Airport Stories. There are some brilliant ones. Dearest Martha, kiss me and smile for me. Tell me that you'll wait for me. Hold me like you'll never let me go, because I'm leaving on a jet plane. And stuff like that all over Twitter.
That's so funny.
All over Twitter today. So if you're looking for some entertainment, hopefully you have the day off, and you have some time on your hands, you will waste a lot of it reading these.
Punch that into my favorite is under the portrait of Washington astride his strapping stallion, as we say in the Yankee Doodle, saying dear Delta, does my companion animal need
my emotional support animal.
Support animal that was need its own seat.
So here's the thing. He already came out today and said, well, the teleprompter was malfunctioning.
Oh yeah, right.
No, I think his eyeballs may have been malfunctioning. I've read off a teleprompter on occasion.
Right.
It's not the easiest thing to do.
No.
And mistakes are made. And to get through a speech like that without making it, but it's okay to just say, hey, I screwed up a couple of words.
He can't do that. He's constitutionally
Well,
incapable.
narcissists never apologize.
No.
And so
Narcissists.
never admit they're wrong.
Yeah.
And never admit
And
defeat either.
He is, right. And
Because
he is a classic narcissist
Yes.
in every single way. I mean, there are checklists. You can read about narcissists, and maybe someone is 7 out of 10, but he's 10 out of 10.
Right.
Well,
in a teleprompter
Go ahead.
situation, though, you are given. I mean, you have the prompter that is your speech is loaded into the prompter, and then you are given the hard copy. At least you should be given the hard copy for just.
That's just a
those
prop
kinds of
on
things.
TV.
Well, on TV, it's a prop. Hewlett Perkins folds his lengthwise and just kind of uses it to
Very
look
true.
busy. But I mean, he should have had it in front of him on the lectern, the podium, and have. It wasn't a long speech, but you just kind of keep it moving with your hand without really drawing attention to it. And then when you do have a problem, it's like, what does that say? You can do the quick glance and figure it out.
The airports part is fine. If he's trying to sit there and suggest that, hey, the French fleet bottling up the harbor in Yorktown, yes, we secured the ports.
Right.
Okay,
The ports.
that would be
But
true.
But he sees port and he thinks airport.
Exactly. He did own an airline. He knows more about airplanes and flying planes than the pilots and the generals. He's made that
Steak
clear.
and vodka.
Actually, what I found the most appalling part of that speech was where he he encourages the youth of America to enlist in the service. Not that enlistment is, I mean, that's great, but for, you know, like, as what's her face calls him, Tammy, what's her name, the senator. Duckworth, yeah, calls them Cadet Bone Spurs. You know, for Cadet Bone Spurs to be like, you know, touting the military, a guy who did everything possible not to enlist.
Uncle Don wants you.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
grooming his son Baron.
Oh
for the military.
But can't this kid go in as a general? He's so smart. You know, I don't know why he should have to work his way up like some
How old
peon.
is this kid now? His kid must be
Yeah,
13
I
or
think.
something like that.
Yeah,
Well,
roughly.
bar
on a
mitzvah
more-
age.
Yeah, bar mitzvah.
On a more serious note, in regards to this president, though, I mean, one of the things that he is still suggesting is going to happen is the citizenship question on the census. And we didn't really get a chance to talk about this last
No.
week. The Supreme Court decision that basically kicked it back to the lower court saying, yeah, this is a contrived reason that you want to put this on here. I mean, they basically looked at the evidence where they said, this is going to help us in elections. That's why we need to do this. The president says, even though William Barr said, we don't have a reason.
Yeah.
Other than the one that was spelled out. And so this is over. They've already started printing the census forms.
Right.
And the president still says, nope, I'm not losing on this one. We're going to find a way to get this done. He said it just about 15 minutes ago, as a matter of fact, as he was boarding Air Force One. He still is dead set on putting the citizenship question on the census. And all the reasons that we've ever seen for doing this, yeah, the census can ask a lot of different questions. The Supreme Court gave them a lot of leeway, but they also said they got to kick it down to the lower court. So there's a court order saying that this is not going to be on there.
Right.
He's trying to potentially issue some executive order to override the courts on this one. I'm not sure how that's going to work.
don't think it is either.
I think my understanding was the Supreme Court wasn't saying that. It was, you know, undoable.
No, but they said you better come up with a reason other than it's going to screw the other guy.
You better approach this in a better way.
Yeah.
It goes back to the courts, and the courts, you know, I mean, look, if the guy goes through and the court orders stand, it'll be pretty darn interesting to see where we go from there. How, you know, I mean, once the Supreme Court rules, I mean, and I'm not sure what the enforcement would be for that, but it would seem to be that the Attorney General's office could take some legal action.
Yeah.
It would seem criminal.
I had a
certainly contempt.
I had a boss many years ago who had no filter and would just spout ideas like, let's do this thing, let's do that thing, let's do this other thing. And a guy that I knew who worked with him as well said, you got to follow the rule of threes. He said, the first time he tells you this, you just ignore him. The second time he tells you this, you ignore him. You don't have to actually work, do anything that he says, act on these ideas that he has until he tells you 3 times. And I think a normal functioning adult would say, we're disappointed to have lost at the court. However, we respect the court's decision. That's the way our system works, you know, the usual stuff. He's incapable of that. He can't do that. He's so insecure that everything has to say, we're going to fight this. We're going to go back. We're going to appeal. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It just doesn't, the world doesn't work that way, but he hasn't acknowledged that yet.
Well, the thing is, the lower courts are under no obligation to expedite this just because of the timeline that they want to do. I mean, look, okay, great. They got plenty of time before the 2030 census.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
basically
We'll work
what
it
this
out.
is going to be.
Yeah.
And
I can't recall, is it being kicked back to the district court or the Court of Appeals?
it's going back to the original court, from what I understand. But the district court and the appeals court both ruled that this was not something that could be put on there
Right.
for the same reasons. And the Supreme Court, like I said, gave them some latitude that if you want to do this in the future, we'd be willing to hear, but your arguments better be better than, again, like I said, it would screw over the other party.
Your arguments
Right, yeah.
better not suck.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what they've got so far. And William Barr even just said, yeah, we don't really have a lot good here. And so the Attorney General says it's dead. Everybody says it's dead. And the president says, no, it's not. And so we'll see what they decide to do on this
Rule of
one.
3.
But I
It's
mean,
I
like-
just wonder what the recourse
Put
is.
a new
if
toy
he-
in front of him. Like, give him a new, just figure out something else and it'll quietly die. I
Well,
hope.
I mean, I think it would add to the arsenal of impeachment if he ignored a court order.
Yeah.
well, if that happens, yeah, I think that's something that Congress would definitely have to act on. But maybe that's what he wants.
That chance.
Interestingly enough, I mean, President Trump is just involved in everything. This is a Michigan story, one that we have on Deadline Detroit.
Yeah.
Justin Amash, of course, announced yesterday that he is leaving the Republican Party. He is going to be an independent. He is going to run as an independent. I believe it was one of the reporters at the Capitol caught up with him yesterday at whatever parade he was marching in over on the west side of the state in his district for the 4th of July and asked him, and he said, yeah, I'm going to run as an independent. So he is going to stay in the race. Already some people are lining up to challenge him. But President Trump tweeted out yesterday when Justin Amash said, I have to leave. I don't like the partisanship that we're seeing. It's devolving into this a little bit too much both-siderism for me in his tweet. But again, he's not going to completely diss his own party.
Right. That's the way it goes.
But here's what President Trump responded. He said, great news for the Republican Party as one of the dumbest and most disloyal men in Congress is quitting the party.
Yeah.
No collusion, no obstruction. Knew he couldn't get the nomination to run again in the great state of Michigan, already being challenged for his seat. A total loser.
Yeah. What, that's really mature. Yeah. I know.
But, again, he was first elected in 2010. He's been reelected a few times.
I'd be curious to see.
I'm trying to get an interview with him right now just because I'd love to talk to him.
I mean, I think
I would think it'd be great to see what Donald Trump was like in junior high and see if he's really changed at all. I mean, the language that he uses, you're a loser, this and that. I mean, he must have been using that.
He's got 100-word vocabulary.
It must have been in middle school
phenomenal,
that he
loser.
started talking that way.
The one word in that the loser stuff, whatever.
Dumb. And to call him dumb.
I don't even care about that. I do care about the disloyal part.
Yeah.
You know what? If you're a congressperson, your loyalty is to your constituents and your values, not to any political party that you belong to. Yeah, of course, you're going to be harassed to toe the line and follow along. That's why they call them whips in Congress, right? Because they try to get you to follow the party line. But at the same time, your loyalty is not to the president. It is not to the party. It is to your constituents and their
Mitch
desires.
McConnell and Lindsey Graham.
Exactly. But that's, again, it was Independence Day. So Justin Amash, use this platform that you've got it while people are paying attention to you and remind folks that that's what it's about. Because this was on Independence Day, he tweeted this out. Yeah, it's not. There's no loyalty oath in this country. Yeah. There isn't.
I'm sorry. I feel like I need to play the little piccolo that plays whenever the guy on Green
the guy who gets shot first, basically.
Anyway, but no, Justin Amash is. I mean, it'll be interesting to see the way this plays out because I remember when after he broke when he did his tweet stream that said that Trump had committed impeachable offenses and he formally broke with Trump, and then he had that town hall, and I thought he would be roasted at this town hall, this being West Michigan. He was not roasted. There were quite a few Democrats who turned out to support him for this.
Well, look, whether you agree with his politics or not, and there are some positions he takes that I'm not a fan of, but at the same time, he is usually sticking to his guns on this stuff.
Right. Yeah. And you have to respect that. And the fact that he actually read the Mueller report, which I think is probably more than you can say about a lot of members of Congress, I think that's remarkable. So we'll see what happens.
Do you think Trump actually read any of the Mueller report?
Of course not. God, I don't think Trump could read the back of a cereal box. I mean, he has a hard enough time reading from a teleprompter.
Cereal. It's for losers. Losers who can't afford Eggs Benedict.
Ramming the ramparts.
Let them eat quiche. All right. Let's take a look. I should remind folks, this is the week that was on Deadline Detroit. I am Craig Fahle. Of course, Nancy Derringer is with us. Alan Lengel is here as well. Some stories that got a ton of traffic on Deadline this week that I want to get to.
Yeah, we had a crazy week.
Wow. The Lodge.
We on the Lodge with it.
We on the Lodge with it. Oh, my God. I mean, people are freaking out about this left and right. Some guys blocked off the freeway.
Briefly.
Some people filmed it. They were doing donuts in the middle of the Lodge freeway up by Livernois.
And Dodge Hellcats.
Which are very, very fast cars, obviously. Lots of horsepower.
About 700 horses.
And that's about what that horsepower is good for, is to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not very practical in day-to-day use. Somebody may disagree with me, but,
Isn't this in the great tradition, though, of Detroit, like street racing and so forth?
It's taken it to a new level. I mean, we ran something about it starting out, it was Vice that did a story about it starting out in San Francisco, L.A.,
they call them sideshows.
Sideshows, but they just blocked off like roads. Yeah. But to block off the Lodge freeway is really taking it to a new level.
And it was very late at night. Wasn't it like after midnight, I believe?
It wasn't that late, but still, I mean,
I'm not justifying it in any way.
All it was stupidity.
Is it? And it
because
was stupid
people put it on social media, and one guy already got arrested.
Yeah, I know.
It seems like from those, what are they? The ATV or those little off-terrain vehicles?
Yeah, the ATVs.
Where we've seen them sort of trying to taunt the
Yeah,
police and
sure.
stuff like that. And this seems like to take it to a whole new level.
Yeah. Those are expensive cars too. So I noticed that the guy who was arrested lives in Plymouth. So,
Canton.
Oh, Canton. Okay.
Wow.
Well, somewhere up there. So they come in to Wayne County in the city of Detroit to do their dirt. These
Well, he very well
suburbanites.
could have. I don't know the guy's history, but
No, I
there's a
don't
lot of
either.
people that used to live in Detroit that moved to the suburbs, but still claim that they're from Detroit and
I
come
know.
back here to
Right.
do this kind of stuff.
Right, of course.
So,
So, they feel like they can get away with it easier there.
Well, there
So,
you go.
right.
So, at what point after leaving Detroit are you no longer a Detroiter?
I don't know. That's a good question. But still, I mean, at this point,
This is
I
at the
realized
heart of
this was
a bunch of
extremely
this debate,
dangerous.
though. I mean,
I know.
And the same with the Belle Isle thing that we're going to get to in just a second.
I realized this is very dangerous. I realized this was a stupid thing to do. I cannot get up on my outrage horse over it, though.
Well, the police had a press conference about it the day
I know.
after.
They were so humiliated. Well, they were humiliated. I mean, it's
Well, they were on the wrong side of the freeway, so they couldn't get through. That was the thing.
you can't stop that right now.
That's right. That's right. But it has taken on a life of its own. There's T-shirts
Yep.
that are out there. Apparently,
On the lodge
there's
with
a
it. It is
song
the
that's already been written.
It's a catchphrase of the summer for me. I'm going to try to use that. As
I'm
much
on
as
the lodge
possible.
with it.
This show is totally on the lodge with it.
There you
So
go.
There you go.
All right, Belle Isle. The Detroit News puts in a story suggesting that not everybody's happy with what Belle Isle has become since the state took over management of the park. And I need to stress this. They leased it from the city of Detroit for a 30-year period. This is not a permanent transfer of land. It is not an illegal land transfer, as a lot of people have been claiming. This isn't a land grab. It's not something that can be sold to developers. It is a 30-year lease to help the city maintain the park. Now, granted, you do have to pay the $10 plate fee or whatever
11,
to get on.
yeah.
But once a year,
Yeah.
if you want to do it, or I think it's a
Fairly
buck at a time or something.
And that'll get you in any park.
any
No,
state
it's
park.
one of-
And there's
it's
100
the
of them.
lowest. It's
Yeah.
the lowest state pass in the country. So
Yeah.
lowest price.
I mean, it wouldn't if you were to pay $2 to go in every time.
Still,
it
yeah,
wouldn't be
and you
But-
can bike or
so
walk on
terrible, or
the.
even
But the
Island
debate
Live.
that has been sparked over this as
Yeah.
to who is the park for now as a result of this was this, I've been looking at the comment section, which I don't advise it.
No, I
everybody.
don't either.
I really don't. Because things go off kilter pretty quickly. But I was really sort of surprised at some of the debate. There's a pretty healthy split that any police presence on the island is deemed as suspect and meant to drive people from the city away from the park that belongs to them is what you
I think
see
the
that
park,
a lot.
I think
That's
park
the
is
argument that's being
nicer.
made.
Since the
Well, the
state took
Detroit
over.
police were on the island before the takeover or the
Yeah.
the new deal.
Right.
But I get the feeling that they were not nearly as hard nosed about enforcing speeding, which is mainly what we're talking about. We're talking about speeding, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're not busting picnickers because they brought a little wine in their basket, right? As long as everybody's behaving themselves, it's fine. But it goes to the difference to the DWB thing. I mean, there are even people like, and I quoted in the story was what Janice Winfrey, the Detroit city clerk, and some minister, I believe. They even people like that who are not, they're upstanding. They're not thugs or anything like that, but they have to worry about what's going to happen and how quickly a simple traffic stop can go bad. Now, maybe it's an abundance of caution. Maybe maybe they shouldn't be so worried about it. But I mean, I don't blame them when you see some of the things that have happened in this country in the last few years that have been captured on cell phone video.
Well, it was interesting. Janice Winfrey, of course, is the city clerk, is one of the people that was pretty vocal in that story about this, and just said, "Well, you saw what happened to that kid on the ATV at the hands of the state police,
that was the minister who said that. But
it was the minister.
Yeah,
That's
but
right.
he was.
Excuse me, that was Charles
he was
Williams.
right.
Who, disclosure, I've done some work with him recently,
Okay.
so I just
Charles
want to put that
Williams
out there. I do
II,
know
yeah.
the guy,
and he was absolutely right. I mean, you saw what happened, and that's. Normal cops should not be doing that. That guy was a bad apple. He was thrown off the force. He was convicted. But the point is that, I think that's a legit fear. And I can't blame people for feeling that way. Although, indisputably, the park is nicer now. So,
it is.
when it's not underwater at the moment. But
Well,
yeah.
that's.
I mean, I think the answer is not to get rid of cops. I mean, the answer is to, do better policing and more community policing. But, the idea that, all cops are bad. I mean, there are some bad cops.
Yeah, there are absolutely bad
And that
cops.
doesn't mean that we shouldn't have, the park police
Sure.
and stuff like that. But we should certainly be aware of if there's any abuses by police, that should be certainly highlighted.
Yeah, and they gave. I mean, she said Janice Winfrey said they let her off with a warning, which I think is probably reasonable. And I have no. She claimed she wasn't.
They didn't even
speeding.
run her stuff.
They said she was speeding. She said I wasn't speeding. Who knows? You know.
Well, we shall see.
Yeah.
Hey, Illich's missed a deadline on the Hotel Eddie
Shocking.
Stone. I know. And apparently, they haven't done anything to them yet.
Yeah.
The city does have some new tools in the tool chest, apparently, to deal with them, and whether or not they're actually going to complete some of the promises they made, especially when it comes to the Hotel Eddie Stone, which has been sitting vacant for a long time. Obviously, there's a lot of skepticism on the part of the public that the city is going to pull the trigger on some of those things.
Right.
What is, at this point, and I don't have the answer to this, I'm trying to ask you guys whether at what point do they pull the trigger on this? Is it just one missed deadline? Have they used up all of their other stuff to this point where they said, okay, guess what? We can pull this bond that we have now, and then we'll take over the project.
And the question is, does the city even want to do that? Or, I guess they would just give it to somebody else. But I mean, you had a metaphor that we were talking about in the office this morning. Do you want to
Well, I was just
tease
saying,
the column you want to write about this?
I was just saying to write a column called "It's Just Lunch," where you always tell people, "Hey, let's get together for lunch," and that seems to be the Illich's sort of mentality of. Hey,
and then you never get together for lunch.
Yeah, you never get together for lunch.
It's a way to
and
shine
it's
people on.
They just keep leading people on and saying, yeah, we're going to have lunch sometime, and then,
Give me a call. Yeah.
Yeah, give me a call, and that seems to be the attitude with the District of Detroit. It's really, I mean, what they've done in that area is they've suppressed development in that area for well over 15 years. That area would have been developed. I mean, I used to live across the street over on Winder, and in Brush Park there, and that area has been well developed, and now it's particularly being developed quite a bit. And that area was suppressed because they were quietly buying property, and
leaving it to rot. They had their finger
leave
on
it
the
to
scale.
rot,
Yeah.
and they still don't. I mean, to me, I think the Illich's should be obligated. District of Detroit is theirs. They should have their own police force like Gilbert has. They should have people patrolling around there. For all those years that they've left that area eerie. I mean, you occasionally walk to the bar or something from my place at night, and it was so eerie there. I mean, the Illich's have felt no obligation to create a safe environment, and that was the same thing with the Joe Louis. You'd go to the Joe Louis, and people would vanish from the city because you'd walk after, about an hour after the game, the streets were empty again.
It was dystopian down there.
And all they relied on was a few police that they could get from the Detroit police, when in fact, Gilbert, to his credit, has always decided whenever he's going to bring workers and have people live down in a certain area, he provides security. I mean,
right.
That's part of the big debate over the Detroit stuff. But
the short answer to your question is, I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see what it takes for the city to actually pull the trigger and take advantage of the new tools they put in place. At a meeting that Violet and I attended, Violet, of course, from Deadline Detroit, went to the meeting of the Downtown Development Authority, in which they actually agreed to some of these new sanctions if they don't live up to their end of the bargain. So we'll see if the city does anything about it.
Yeah.
Mike Morse. We've got a few minutes left.
Okay.
Mike Morse, who, of course, goes for the win. He does.
Mike wins.
855.
Mike Morse, go for the win. That'll be, by the way, check can be sent to Deadline Detroit for that advertisement.
No charge for that. 855, Mike wins.
He is in a little bit of trouble.
Not to be confused, 1-800, call Sam.
So you've got a federal court ordered him to comply with a subpoena because this judge, and this is the quote, this is what the judge says, he does appear to be, for all intents and purposes, that's right, intents and purposes, people.
Yeah,
for all intents and purposes, on these pleadings and on this record, the epitome of the unnamed co-conspirator. Now, this centers around whether or not there was a police officer in Detroit that was illegally funneling police reports to
Mike Wins,
which is something that is being investigated. There are federal charges actually on that one right now, because the advantage of getting those things before all the other attorneys do. Do I need to explain?
They're leads.
They are leads. They are leads. It's the Glengarry leads, people.
Yeah, it's the leads.
It's like Jack Lemmon stealing those leads out of the office before they go public.
Right.
Get an unfair advantage. You get a chance to contact these people before all the other attorneys, but typically it's sort of like a grab bag. They all become public at the same time, and then every attorney can make those phone calls to these people that might need representation.
Yeah.
That's the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
So did these Detroit police officers start funneling these leads to the Morse people? But the other question is was Mike Morse's people funneling medical referrals to a clinic, an MRI center that he may or may not have had ownership in, depending on whether or not his brother-in-law counts as his ownership or not.
Right.
So, I mean, this case is really giving us insight as to exactly what's wrong with the auto insurance system here in Michigan. And people say, why is it so expensive in Detroit? It's not the redlining people. It's this kind of medical stuff that goes on.
Sure.
This is what is leading it. I think this case, now he's got to answer. This is going to, I think, potentially really expose this system for what it's become.
Right. And if this goes forward and all of this stuff comes out, I think it'll be very clear. We'll see. We'll find out.
Well,
I mean, we don't want to convict the guy, but
no. But I'll be interested to see how many other people are taking a look at their quote unquote holdings, some of these other firms that are out there, and whether or not this kind of stuff is going on, because at minimum it's unethical.
Right.
There are some illegal things alleged in this out there, especially when it comes to those leads and whether or not the police officers were funneling them to people in exchange for cash.
Right.
Well, I think one I think one of the things, there is such a thing as fraud when you're going to, and which is one of the things
that's what State Farm is alleging in their
they're alleging fraud is that when you get in a car crash, I'm an attorney, I call you and say, hey, how's your neck? And you say, I'm good.
I've got a great doctor for you.
I think you need to get that checked out, because you never know.
They always say, sometimes the pain from these accidents doesn't appear for a few days.
Well, and that is true.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you can sit there and go, I feel fine. A couple days later, you're really
the
sore.
The adrenaline has
and you should get yourself checked out if you get into an accident. You absolutely should. But if they're sitting there going, man, we think you might need an MRI too. Oh, and by the way, here's a guy, they'll get you right in.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the kind of stuff that people need to really
when you start paying, you're offering to pay patients. You come in, we'll give you a little this or that. There's definitely, fraud is fraud. And there's civil actions and there's criminal actions involving fraud. So we'll see where this all leads.
Where it goes.
One last thing to talk about here today, in the fact that Rick Snyder had been offered a fellowship at Harvard, and because of the swift and angry responses from Michigan residents, he has decided to decline that offer. And as he said in his statement, hey, I was going to tell them about my experience in government, good and bad. But there were a lot of people that were saying, why would Harvard bring in a guy who might be responsible for the Flint water crisis? This was not a good look for Harvard.
Harvard is a little tone deaf.
And it was also a bad look for him.
When you have a $2 billion endowment, you don't care.
Right.
Yeah, where he blames this on civility. Basically, he doesn't want to be criticized for this. He doesn't like having people call him a water poisoner, a city poisoner.
We had a similar, somewhat of a parallel thing way back when Bob Giles, the editor of the Detroit News, when we were on strike, he was the editor of the Detroit News. And then subsequently, he was involved. The Detroit News was trying to bust the unions. And then subsequently, he was nominated for a fellowship to head up the Neiman Fellowship program. And he was about to get it. And then all these strikers found out and started protesting and started contacting some other people involved in the selection process. And they put a hold on it. And then at the last minute, I believe like John Carroll at the LA Times, some of the muckety mucks in the journalism community stepped forward and helped him, finally nail that down. But it was a very controversial thing. And like I said, the unions had said, this guy was trying to bust the unions. And so you're going to bring him in now. And so it's the same thing with Snyder where, could people learn? Could he educate people on how he screwed up? What missteps he might have made? Is it worthy of him talking to people at Harvard? Yes, but
at the same time, I don't think I've ever heard him really publicly acknowledge, the extent to which that went on. He's expressed regret and that sort of thing, but he's never really put any of it on him. Yeah. And he's had some.
Well, he's under investigation. He doesn't.
Well,
want
that's
to
the other thing I want to say before we break. I had drinks on Wednesday night with a friend of mine who's an attorney, and we were talking about this, and he goes, I wonder if Dana's about to indict him. So I had no idea. I mean, maybe.
Yeah. So I think he probably has to be a little careful about telling the class, and then the class is suddenly witnesses in a criminal trial.
Yeah, right.
Oh, well, okay, one more subject.
Right.
Because I want to get to this, because we didn't get a chance to get to this last week. Of course, the Democrats had their debate. And what's interesting to me is that what has come out of this, obviously, is Kamala Harris has raised up, Joe Biden has come down, and it's been on the issue of busing.
Of all things.
Of all things. I mean, this is something... Here's why I think this was such a brilliant move on Kamala Harris's part. Yeah, she's being questioned a little bit about how much she really understands what went on back in the 1970s and 80s.
Right.
But what she succeeded in doing is making Joe Biden look really, really old.
Yeah,
because
very
this
much so.
is stuff that this country was debating when I was going to grade school, and starting middle school at that point in
Old and
time.
white.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly it.
Right. She gets to reframe the narrative now, of what busing
I was a
all
little
about.
kid when this was going on.
Right, yeah, right.
Meanwhile, you have decisions in your background, in your closet, that go back to 1970. I mean,
Right, sure. And it's kind of like, when busing is discussed in terms of, say, Metro Detroit, it's L. Brooks Patterson, who is an old man.
is it Milliken? Was it Milliken?
I
v.
don't
Bradley,
know.
if
I
I'm not
didn't live here
mistaken.
at the time, but it was an issue that at the time was framed and discussed in terms of people Joe Biden's age. We haven't heard from the kids who are climbing onto those school buses, and hey, look, they're all grown up now, and they have some memories and some opinions about it now that they might want to share. So it's going to be an interesting race. I'm really looking forward to the Detroit debate later this month, and I am really hoping, if anyone is listening, that Marianne Williamson accepts Deadline Detroit's request for an interview, because, man, we want to do a Q&A with her.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, man.
And I was right. It was Milliken v. Bradley here in Michigan. That case was from 1974. It's the case that basically made Brooks Patterson's career.
Right.
I mean, and Brooks Patterson is now stepping down from the political arena. And so I think if there's one thing that Kamala Harris did well, is to put a real significant dent in his armor and make people realize that,
Man, he is old.
think about all the different positions that have changed on the part of the Democratic Party from when he started to where they are now. Yeah, I'm sorry, the party in 1974 wasn't quite as woke as it is now. So
This
anyway,
will be interesting.
we shall see. Anyway, have a great weekend, everybody.
Yes.
Certainly do appreciate it. Kind of a weird Friday, that in between a holiday
Right.
and a
It
weekend.
almost seems like Monday.
I know, it really does.
It seems
It's
like
strange.
Monday. You
It
take a
does.
break
My
and then
husband's like,
suddenly
you have to go to work today? I'm like, hon.
Is this work? Is this work?
I feel
No,
like
this
we're
doesn't
getting
feel like
it's
work.
like a double weekend
Yeah.
now. Tomorrow's Saturday already.
Exactly. Well, Nancy Derringer, we always appreciate it very much. Alan Langle, thank you. Thanks to
you.
Michael Lucido for engineering the broadcast today. I'm Craig Fahle. This has been The Week That Was on Deadline Detroit. Check out also lots of great stuff on Deadline TV. Look at the Zip a little bit later on today. That'll be out. And of course, my podcast is available every single weekday on Deadline Detroit. Have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy. Hey, the Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit is made possible by Samaritas, which is the state's largest private foster care and adoption agency. But they do a heck of a lot more than that. They've been serving homeless families, persons with disabilities, abused and trafficked women. They're also one of the largest resettlement agencies in the state. They provide market rate and affordable housing for seniors and HUD housing for families. And they also have skilled nursing, memory care, and rehab communities in Grand Rapids, Cadillac, and Saginaw. Samaritas, thanks for their support. Great organization doing great stuff all around the state.